Every story in this video is a real incident. And the scariest part is how normal they start. A toddler describes a bald man in your kitchen. Then a letter shows up addressed to Jordan at your exact house. A pub alarm triggers, and CCTV shows a latched panel fling open by itself. A stereo gets unplugged and still talks back. Which would you trust? Your eyes, your kids, or the camera footage? Story 7. My parents were divorced, and growing up, my mom would sometimes talk about my dad's house in a way that made it sound a little off. Not outright terrifying, not like something straight out of a horror movie, but strange enough that it stuck with you. The house itself was old, the kind of place you'd expect to find in a tiny Midwestern town where everyone knows everyone. The population couldn't have been more than a couple hundred people, but when most of the houses were worn down in that familiar, lived-in way. My dad's place stood out a bit because of an addition that had been built onto it at some point. That part of the house was what we all called the back room. It wasn't just one room either, it was a whole section. There was a large open space filled with boxes and old belongings, and attached to it was a bedroom that no one really used. For as long as I could remember, my dad kept it mostly closed off. It wasn't locked exactly, but it wasn't somewhere we spent time either. As a kid, though, it was amazing. It felt like a hidden world. Whenever I did get a chance to go back there, it was like stepping into a place frozen in time. There were boxes stacked everywhere, filled with random things, old toys, papers, books, fishing lures, and things that didn't seem to belong together, but somehow all ended up in the same place. It had that dusty, slightly stale smell that comes from years of storage, and everything felt just a little out of place, like it had been forgotten. My mom used to tell us that she had stored her guitar back there at one point, and sometimes she would hear it being strummed, not like someone playing a song, but like a hand brushing across all the strings at once. She said it would happen at random times, during the day or late at night. The way she described it made it sound casual, like something she had accepted without really questioning too much. There were other small things too. Footsteps when no one else was around. Occasional bangs from somewhere in the house. Objects that seemed to have been moved slightly, and nothing that couldn't be explained if you tried hard enough. Old houses make noise. Things shift. It was easy to brush it off and move on. As I got older, around 11 or 12, I started looking at the back room differently. Instead of something mysterious, it started to feel like an opportunity. No one was using it. It was huge compared to the rest of the house, and it even had its own bedroom attached. In my mind, it was perfect. I decided I wanted it to be my space. When I brought it up to my dad, I expected some resistance, but to my surprise, he agreed. There wasn't much discussion about it. It was late in the evening when we talked, and I was too excited to wait. I dragged a mattress into the back room and set it up on the floor, planning to sort everything out properly the next day. That night, as I went to bed feeling proud of my decision, it felt like I had claimed something that no one else wanted. The room was quiet, darker than the rest of the house, but not in a way that felt threatening at first. Just unfamiliar. I lay there for a while, listening to the usual sounds of the house settling, and eventually, I fell asleep. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. I didn't know what had pulled me out of sleep at first, but then I heard it. The best way I can describe it is that it sounded like chaos. Like 1,000 birds trapped in the room, all flying at once, wings beating against the walls, colliding with everything around them. But at the same time, it also sounded like something else. Like hands. Hundreds of hands, maybe more. slapping against the walls, rapid and constant. The sound was everywhere, and it wasn't coming from one direction. It surrounded me. I lay there frozen, trying to make sense of it. My heart was pounding, and every instinct told me not to move. The sound felt too close, too intense. At one point, I could swear it was happening just above my head, maybe a foot or so away, like something was right there with me. I pulled the blankets over my head, hoping that if I couldn't see anything, it would somehow make it less real. The noise didn't stop. It kept going, relentless, filling the room, making it impossible to think. Time stretched out in a strange way. It felt like it went on forever. But if I had to guess, it was probably around 30 minutes. Long enough to make it feel like it would never end. Eventually, out of fear and desperation more than anything else, I said something. It wasn't loud, and it was barely more than a whisper. I just mumbled, "Let me sleep tonight, and I'll never sleep here again." The moment I said it, the noise stopped. Completely. There was no fading, no gradual quieting. It just ended like someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was almost as overwhelming as the sound had been. I stayed under the blanket for a long time, too scared to move, too scared to even look around. At some point, exhaustion must have taken over, because I eventually fell back asleep. The next day, I didn't say anything. Not to my dad. Not to anyone. I was terrified. But I was also afraid of being laughed at or not being believed. It felt easier to pretend nothing had happened, even though the memory of it was still fresh in my mind. As night came around again, the fear came back with it. I didn't want to go back into that room, but I didn't know how to explain why, without sounding crazy. I tried to convince myself it had been a dream, or some kind of strange, half-asleep experience. I started to head toward the back room anyway, telling myself I would just get through the night somehow. But before I could go in, my dad opened the door. He looked at me for a moment and then said, in a calm, almost casual way, "If there's something back there bothering you, you don't have to sleep back there." He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't question me. It was like he already knew. That was all it took. I didn't hesitate. I turned around immediately and slept in a different room that night. And after that, I never tried to make the back room mine again. Story 4. My parents used to manage a pub in London, and because of that, we lived in a flat directly above it. Growing up there always felt a little different from living in a normal house. The building was old, full of history, and it had that constant mix of sounds, voices from downstairs during the day, music, footsteps, doors opening and closing. But at night, when everything shut down and the place went quiet, it felt like a completely different world. For as long as I can remember, we joked about the place being haunted. It wasn't anything serious at first, just small things that didn't quite make sense. The lights hanging from the ceiling above the bar would sometimes swing gently, even when there didn't seem to be any reason for them to move. We would tell ourselves it was probably a draft, maybe air coming in from somewhere we couldn't see. Then there were the creaking noises, on the kind you expect in an old building. Floorboards shifting, pipes making sounds, wood settling. All of it could be explained, at least on the surface. But even with those explanations, there was always a feeling that something else might be there. Not something obvious or threatening, just a presence that made the quiet moments feel a little heavier than they should have been. One night, though, something happened that was much harder to brush off. I was staying at home for a short while, and it was late. around 1 in the morning. The pub had been closed for hours. The alarms had been set, the lights turned off, and everything was locked up properly. The way the alarm system worked was simple. If it detected significant movement inside the pub, it would trigger. It wasn't sensitive to small things like minor vibrations or tiny shifts, and it needed something noticeable. I was still awake, just lying there in the quiet, while the rest of my family had already gone to bed. The silence was deep, the kind that makes every little sound stand out. And then, suddenly, the alarm went off. It wasn't just loud, it was shocking. I had only ever heard it go off once before, and even that had been enough to stick with me. Hearing it again in the middle of the night, knowing everything was supposed to be locked and empty, made my heart jump instantly. My first thought was that someone had broken in. I got up quickly, adrenaline kicking in, already thinking about grabbing something to defend myself. My mind was racing, going through every possible worst-case scenario. Within seconds, my mom and dad came rushing out of their bedrooms, clearly just as alarmed. Well, none of us needed to say anything. We all knew what it meant. We unlocked the door that separated our flat from the pub and stepped inside. The place was completely dark at first, and that made it even more tense. We turned on the lights and grabbed whatever we could find. Something heavy. Something we could use if we had to. There was this strange mix of fear and determination, like we were preparing for something serious. We moved through the bar carefully, checking every corner, every doorway. It felt almost unreal, like we were acting out some kind of scene, quietly moving, listening for any sign that someone else was there. Doors were pushed open with our feet. Quick glances into shadowed areas, all of us alert and tense. But there was nothing. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry, no movement. Everything seemed exactly as it should be. And then we noticed it. Near the men's toilets, there was a small wooden panel that covered some of the pub's electronics and fuses. It wasn't something customers would usually pay attention to, but we all knew it was there. It was always kept shut, secured with a latch so it wouldn't accidentally swing open. The panel itself was solid, not something light or flimsy. That night, it was wide open. We all just stood there for a moment, staring at it. It didn't make sense. That panel had never come open on its own before. It wasn't loose, and it wasn't something that could just drift open with a bit of air. The latch required a bit of force to undo, and the panel itself had enough weight that it wouldn't just move without a reason. We started trying to explain it. Maybe something had hit it, but there was nothing around that could have caused that. Maybe an animal. But even that didn't seem possible. A rat or anything that size wouldn't have been strong enough to open it, especially with the latch holding it in place. And there was no way a draft could have done it either. It just didn't add up. Eventually, after checking the entire pub and finding nothing else out of place, we turned the alarm off and went back upstairs. None of us really slept well after that. The image of that open panel stayed in my mind, along with the sound of the alarm cutting through the silence. The next day, we decided to check the CCTV footage. We needed some kind of explanation, something that would make it all feel normal again. When we found the moment on the recording, we watched it carefully. The pub was empty, just as it should have been. No movement, no shadows. Nothing unusual at first. And then, without any visible cause, the panel suddenly swung open. Not slowly, not gently, but forcefully, like something had pushed it. There was nothing there. No person, no animal, no sign of anything touching it. Just the panel moving on its own. We replayed it more than once, trying to catch something we might have missed. But there was nothing else to see. Just that one moment where it opened for no reason at all. After that, none of us really tried to come up with explanations anymore. We'd spent enough time convincing ourselves that the smaller things could be explained. The swinging lights, the creaking sounds, the strange little movements. But this felt different. This was something we had seen, something recorded, something that didn't fit into any of the explanations we had used before. In the end, we all kind of reached the same quiet conclusion. Maybe there really was something there. Not something we could see or understand, but something that had been part of that place long before we lived above it. And after that night, the idea of the pub being haunted didn't feel like a joke anymore. It felt like a possibility we couldn't ignore. Story 12. The house my in-laws used to live in always had a strange feeling to it. It wasn't something obvious at first, nothing you could point to and say, "That's not right." It was more subtle than that. The kind of place where things felt normal during the day, but at night or in quiet moments, something just felt slightly off. At the time, my wife and I had sold our own house and were planning to buy the one my in-laws were living in. They had another place they were fixing up, so the plan was simple. We would all live together for a while until their other house was ready, and then we would take over this one. So my wife, my oldest daughter, and I moved in with them. The house was pretty full because my in-laws had already started packing. Most of the extra bedrooms were piled with boxes, furniture, and things they planned to move later. Because of that, my daughter ended up sharing a room with us. It wasn't ideal, but it was temporary, and we made it work. For the most part, things felt normal in the beginning. There were no big signs that anything was wrong. Just a quiet house, a little crowded, but manageable. Then one morning, something happened that I still think about. It was early, and I was still in bed. My wife had already left for work, so it was just me and my daughter in the house. I was half asleep when I heard her come into the room. She said, very clearly, "Scoot over, Daddy. I'm getting in your bed. I feel bad." Her voice sounded completely normal. It wasn't strange or distorted. It was exactly how she always sounded. I cracked my eyes open just enough to see her standing there in her pajamas. Everything about it felt real and ordinary. I didn't question it. I trusted her to know if she wasn't feeling well enough for school. So I shifted over, making space for her. I felt the bed move slightly, as if someone had climbed in next to me. But something kept me from falling back asleep. Maybe it was the way she said she felt bad. Or maybe it was just instinct. After a few seconds, I rolled over to check on her. There was no one there. At first, I thought maybe she had gotten back up quickly, but the room was completely empty. I sat up, looked around, checked the floor, the doorway. Nothing. There was no sign she'd been there at all. My heart started racing. I grabbed my phone and texted her, trying to keep it casual, even though I was already feeling uneasy. I asked where she'd gone. She replied, school. That made my stomach drop. I asked her when she left, and she said she had left at her normal time a while ago. There was no way she had just been in the room. No way she had climbed into bed and then disappeared without me noticing. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. That moment stayed with me. I tried to explain it to myself. I tried to convince myself I had been dreaming or half asleep. But it didn't feel like a dream. It felt real in a way that was hard to ignore. A few weeks passed, and I didn't mention it much. Life went on, and things seemed mostly normal again. Then my wife told me something that made everything feel a lot less explainable. She said that one night, she had gotten up to use the bathroom. It was dark, quiet, just like any other night. But when she opened the bathroom door, she saw someone standing inside. She described it as a man. Not just any man, but one that looked unusually large, almost towering. And his entire figure looked like it was on fire, glowing red, like flames were surrounding him. What made it even stranger was her reaction. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't even particularly scared. She told me she had seen things her whole life, so to her, it wasn't completely shocking. Still, she thought it was important enough to tell me, just so I was aware. At the time, I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to dismiss it, to find some kind of explanation. But another part of me couldn't ignore how serious she sounded. A few days later, something happened that made it impossible for me to brush it off. I was sitting in the office room with my daughter. We were just spending time together. Nothing unusual. From where we were sitting, you could see down the hallway toward that same bathroom my wife had mentioned. Out of nowhere, my daughter looked in that direction and then turned to me. She said, "Do you see the big red man over there?" I felt a chill run through me instantly. I looked down the hallway, but I didn't see anything. It was empty, just like it always was. But the way she said it, so casually, like she was pointing out something obvious, made it hard to ignore. I asked her what she meant, trying to keep my voice steady. She just kept looking in that direction, like there was something there that I couldn't see. That moment shook me more than anything else. It wasn't just one person seeing something strange anymore. It wasn't just my experience that I could question or explain away. My wife had seen something. Now my daughter was describing something that sounded exactly the same. After that, I couldn't look at the house the same way. Every quiet moment felt different. Every shadow, every sound, every empty space seemed like it could be hiding something I just couldn't see. I never saw the figure myself. Not once. But knowing that two people I trust completely both described the same thing in the same place was enough to make me believe there was something going on in that house that I couldn't explain. And even now, when I think back on it, that's the part that stays with me the most. Not what I saw, but what I didn't. And the fact that somehow they did. Story 14. I've seen what I can only describe as a double of my sister more than once. Even before my own experience, there were small things that didn't make sense. During the holidays, when my uncle came to visit, he would sometimes ask if one of us had been standing near my mom's bird cages. He said he'd clearly seen someone there. But every time he asked, all of us would be in the living room, sitting together, watching TV in the late afternoon. None of us had gone near the birds. We laughed it off at the time, thinking maybe he had just mistaken a shadow or caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of his eye. But one day, I experienced something myself that I still can't explain, even now. I was in 3rd grade at the time. I remember being in one of those moods kids get into, loud, annoyed, and causing a bit of chaos around the house. I don't remember exactly what started it, but I know it had something to do with my sister and a bracelet. I was upset, and in my head, it felt like a very big deal. It was around lunchtime, and when I realized my sisters weren't around, it only made me more irritated. I started calling out for them inside the house, but I didn't get a clear answer. So I went outside, still annoyed, still calling my sister's name. That's when things started to feel off. I clearly heard my sister's voice answer me, but it came from inside the house, from the direction of the kitchen. At the exact same time, I saw her outside. She was running away from me. I remember seeing her back as she moved quickly past the bird cages and toward the back of the house. I didn't stop to think about how strange that was. I was too focused on catching her, still angry, still determined to confront her about whatever had upset me. So I ran after her. But something wasn't right. No matter how hard I ran, I didn't seem to get any closer. It felt like I was stuck in place. The ground beneath me felt wrong, like the cement itself was stretching out, keeping me from moving forward. My legs were moving. I could feel myself running, but my position didn't change. And my sister, she wasn't moving properly either. She stayed at the same distance from me, her back still turned, like she was frozen in that same position, even though she looked like she was running. It was like we were both stuck in some kind of loop, repeating the same motion without actually going anywhere. I remember feeling confused more than scared at first. My anger faded as I tried to understand what was happening. I kept running, trying harder, pushing myself forward. But nothing changed. It felt endless, like time had stretched along with the ground beneath me. Eventually, I ran out of breath. The moment I stopped, everything changed. It was like something snapped back into place. The strange, stretched feeling disappeared instantly. My sister, who had been stuck in front of me the whole time, suddenly moved normally again. She took a few quick steps forward and disappeared behind the back of the house. At the same time, I could still hear my real sister's voice calling back to me from inside the kitchen. I stood there for a second, trying to catch my breath, my heart pounding. Then I slowly walked toward the back of the house, where I had just seen her go. When I got there, there was nothing. Just a solid brick wall. There was no door, no opening, no place for anyone to hide. There was absolutely no way someone could have gone that way and disappeared. I felt a chill run through me then, the kind that makes your whole body go still. I turned around and went back inside the house. Both of my sisters were in the kitchen. They had been there the whole time. I didn't say much about it back then. I didn't really know how to explain what I had seen. But thinking back on it now, along with the times my uncle swore he saw one of us standing somewhere we weren't, it makes me wonder what exactly was in that house with us. Whatever it was, it knew how to look like us. And for a moment, it almost convinced me it was real. Story 6. When I moved into college for my freshman year, I ended up in one of the oldest dorm buildings on campus. It was one of those tall, aging towers that had probably seen decades of students come and go. The place had a certain worn-out look to it, like it had stories hidden in its walls. I was assigned a room on the 8th floor, right at the top. At the time, I didn't think much of it. It was just another dorm, another temporary place to live, while I figured out college life. I had 4 roommates, and because the building was so old, the space was smaller than what most people would expect. All 5 of us shared one bedroom, along with a small living area and a single bathroom. It was cramped, but we made it work. We set up our things, arranged the furniture the best we could, and tried to make it feel like home. Still, I remember having this quiet thought in the back of my mind when I first walked in. Something felt slightly off about the room. Not in a dramatic or obvious way, just a subtle feeling that something wasn't quite right. At the time, I brushed it off immediately. I've always been the kind of person who looks for logical explanations. I don't jump to conclusions about ghosts or anything like that. Old building, new environment, stress from moving. There were plenty of reasons why a place might feel strange at first, or so I ignored it and focused on settling in. For a while, nothing unusual really happened. We got into our routines, classes picked up, and life felt normal. It wasn't until the spring semester that things started to get weird, and even then, it didn't happen all at once. It built up slowly, like something testing the boundaries. In our living room, we had this old trunk that we used as a table. It had a padlock on it, mostly because we kept alcohol inside and didn't want to make it too obvious. It wasn't anything fancy, just a practical solution that worked well enough. One night, I woke up to a strange sound coming from the living room. It was a scraping noise, repetitive and quiet, but enough to pull me out of sleep. At first, I just lay there, trying to figure out what it was. The room was dark. Us and all my roommates were asleep around me. The sound kept going, though, so I got up, figuring I'd check it out on my way to the bathroom. When I stepped into the living area, I saw the trunk sitting exactly where it always was. But the padlock attached to it was swinging back and forth on its own. Each time it moved, it scraped against the surface of the trunk, making that same sound I had heard from bed. I stood there for a moment, just watching it. It wasn't moving wildly, just a steady back and forth motion, like someone had pushed it and let it swing. My first thought was that one of my roommates must have been out there before me and nudged it by accident. But when I checked, they were all still in bed, asleep. I didn't want to overthink it. So I used the bathroom and went back to sleep, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe I had imagined part of it. Maybe there was some small movement in the building that caused it. Old buildings shift, pipes make noise, things settle. That's what I told myself, and at the time, it felt like a reasonable explanation. But it didn't stop there. Over the next couple of weeks, something else started happening. And this time, it involved the front door. The doors in our dorm didn't lock automatically. You had to physically lock them when you left, and our resident advisors were always reminding us to do that. But somehow, our door would lock on its own. It wasn't every single time, but it happened often enough to become unsettling. I would step out into the hallway to talk to friends across the way, leaving the door unlocked behind me, fully expecting to walk right back in. But when I turned around and tried to open it, the handle wouldn't budge. It didn't feel like a normal locked door. It felt like someone was holding the handle from the inside, keeping it from turning. The first time it happened, I assumed one of my roommates had come back in and locked it. But when I knocked and called out, no one answered. And when I checked with my roommates later, they either weren't in the room at all or had been standing right next to me in the hallway. It kept happening, over and over again. We would all leave together, come back together, and somehow the door would be locked, as if someone had stayed behind just to mess with us. We tried to explain it away, saying maybe the lock was faulty or the door frame was warped from age. But deep down, it didn't feel like a mechanical issue. Then came the moment that completely changed how I looked at that dorm, that it was the middle of winter, and it was freezing outside. Our window was on the opposite side of the room from the front door, and we always kept it tightly shut and locked. Being on the 8th floor, it didn't open much anyway, and there were safety restrictions in place. The curtain over it stayed closed most of the time, both for warmth and privacy. One day, I was standing near the front door with one of my roommates. We were getting ready to head to the cafeteria, just talking casually, nothing out of the ordinary. The room was still, quiet, normal. Then, without any warning, the curtain across the room started to move. At first, it just shifted slightly, like a breeze had caught it. But there was no breeze. The window was closed and locked. The air in the room felt still. We both stopped talking and looked over. The curtain slowly pulled open on its own, as if someone had reached out and drawn it back. It stayed like that for a second, just hanging there. And then it happened. The curtain was violently ripped off the rod. It didn't slip or fall. It was yanked down with force, like someone had grabbed it and torn it loose. The sound was loud and sharp, echoing through the small space. The fabric dropped to the floor, and the rod shook slightly from the impact. Neither of us moved. We just stood there, staring at it, trying to process what we had just seen. There was no one near the window. Nothing that could have caused that kind of force. It wasn't gradual, it wasn't explainable. It was sudden, aggressive, and completely out of place. We looked at each other, both clearly shaken, and without saying much, we grabbed our things and left the room. And there was no discussion, no attempt to figure it out in that moment. We just needed to get out. Later, we tried to come up with explanations. Maybe it was a rat or a mouse, something hiding behind the curtain. But there were no signs of that anywhere in the room. No droppings, no noises, nothing before or after. And even if there had been, it wouldn't explain the force we saw. It wasn't something small pulling at the fabric. It felt deliberate. That moment stuck with both of us more than anything else. Even now, every once in a while, I'll text that roommate and we'll bring it up. And every time we do, there's this same uncomfortable feeling that comes back. Like we're brushing up against something we still don't understand. Between the swinging padlock, the door that wouldn't open like someone was holding it shut, almost and that curtain being ripped down in front of us. It became impossible to ignore that something strange was going on in that dorm. I've had other weird experiences in my life. Things that could be explained if you really tried. I've always leaned toward logic, toward finding reasons that make sense. But that place, it didn't fit into anything I could easily explain. It wasn't the kind of experience that completely changed my life or made me terrified to exist. It was something quieter than that, but in some ways, even more unsettling. It was the feeling that something was there, just out of reach of understanding, moving around in the same space as us, unnoticed most of the time. And that's what made it stick. Not fear exactly, but the constant awareness that we weren't fully alone, even when everything looked normal. So story 9. When I was about 13, my family moved into this big old house out in the Midwest. It wasn't in town, not in a neighborhood with a bunch of other houses crammed around it. It sat a little ways outside of town, with some space around it and not much traffic. There were trees, fields, and long stretches of quiet. At night, it could get very, very still. During the day, if you were the only one home, that silence could feel peaceful for a while. And then it would start to feel unsettling, like the house itself was listening. My younger brother and I had the 2 bedrooms on the second floor. Everything else was on the main floor. My parents' master bedroom, the kitchen, the living room, the family room, dining room, all the normal stuff. The stairs from the first floor came up to a little landing upstairs. Out from that landing, you could look down and see the front part of the house, including the door to my parents' master bedroom and part of the family room. It was kind of a nice design, because you could lean on the railing and call down to someone without going all the way downstairs. There were several times, especially on quiet afternoons, when I'd be up there on that landing or walking from my room to the bathroom and get the very strong feeling that I was being watched. I'd pause and look down over the railing. The family room would be empty. The master bedroom door would be closed or open just like normal. No one else would be home. The house would be quiet, except for maybe the faint hum of the fridge or the air coming through the vents. And yet, it felt like somebody was standing just out of sight. Maybe in that family room below or in the hallway, looking back up at me. It wasn't a constant thing. It didn't happen every single time I was upstairs. But when it did, it hit hard. That prickling feeling on the back of your neck. The sense that if you turned one way, you might actually see someone there. I tell myself I was just freaking myself out because it was an old house and I was alone. But I'd always end up moving a little faster than normal to get back into my room or to go downstairs. One of the strangest moments in that house happened in my bedroom when I was listening to music one night. This was back when people still used CD players and stereos with big speakers. I had my own setup in my room that I was pretty proud of, with a CD player, an amplifier, and 2 speakers. And I had these big over-ear headphones I used a lot. I remember one evening I was doing homework in my room, and I had my headphones on, and the music turned up pretty loud. It was the kind of volume where you can't really hear anything else, where someone has to tap you on the shoulder to get your attention. I finished my homework and decided it was time to stop the music. I took my headphones off, put the CD case away, and reached around to the back of the stereo to pull the power plug. I yanked the cord out of the wall. The lights on the front of the stereo flickered and then went dark. It was quiet for a second. That strange quiet that feels extra deep after loud music. Then, from the speakers that were now supposedly dead, I heard a voice. It sounded like it came from the speakers themselves, not from inside my head. It was clear, not muffled, like someone speaking right next to me, but just slightly filtered by the speaker grills. The voice said, in a very normal, almost annoyed tone, "I'm surprised you didn't blow out your fucking eardrums." That's it. One sentence. No echo, no extra sound, just that. I sat there frozen, staring at the speakers. I knew I had unplugged the power. I could see the cord hanging, see the little red lights off. There was no way any electronics in that stereo system should have had any power. It wasn't like some radios that have a battery backup. This was just a basic stereo. And the voice came after everything had gone dark. For a long time after that, I questioned if I'd imagined it. Maybe I didn't really hear it from the speakers. Maybe my brain, used to hearing sounds come from that direction, just filled in something. Maybe I had been half asleep. But the memory is vivid. The way the voice sounded slightly amused and slightly critical. The exact sentence. I can still hear it in my head when I think about it. It was one of those moments that makes you doubt your sense of reality for a second. Another incident in that same house happened one evening when I was getting ready to go on a date. I remember because I was more focused on not looking like an idiot than anything else. I was in the upstairs bathroom, standing at the sink, shaving. I had the razor in my right hand and the mirror in front of me. The bathroom door was to my right, closed completely. I could see it in the edge of my vision, but my eyes were mostly on my face in the mirror, so I didn't miss a spot. As I was shaving, the bathroom door slowly started to open. It didn't fly open, and it didn't creak an inch and then stop. It smoothly swung inward, like someone on the other side had grabbed the knob and was gently pushing it toward me. I stopped shaving and turned my head to look directly at the door. As soon as I did, it closed. Again, smoothly, all the way, until it was back in the frame the way it had been. I frowned, waited a moment, then went back to shaving. A minute or so later, it happened again. The door, which had been fully closed, began to ease open. This time I moved my head more slowly, turning toward it. As my eyes reached it, it swung shut once more. Now I was annoyed. I thought maybe my younger brother was messing around, trying to freak me out. It would be exactly the kind of thing a sibling might do if they knew you were going out and wanted to throw you off your game. So the third time it started to open, I kept my face toward the mirror, acting like I hadn't noticed. But I watched the door carefully out of the corner of my eye. The door opened part way. I saw no hand, no shadow, no feet under it. It reached the same point as before, as if someone were peeking in. Then, still with no one there, it eased shut again. That was enough. I put the razor down, wiped my face, and went over to the door. I closed it firmly until I felt the latch catch in the strike plate. That solid click of the latch going into place felt important. Once it was fully latched, it stopped. No more opening on its own. When I told a friend about it later, he said maybe it was air pressure differences. That when I turned my head, I was shifting my weight and moving the air just enough to push the door closed. Maybe the bathroom fan had created a vacuum. Maybe the house settled in that moment. I tried to picture how that would work, and I couldn't quite accept it. It might have been something like that. Or it might have been something deciding to play games with me before my date. Life went on. I grew older. I graduated high school, did a couple of years in college, then ended up dropping out. I met a girl. We got married. Like a lot of young couples, we didn't have a ton of money. So any kind of break on housing was a big deal. My wife had a job as a caretaker at a church. Part of her compensation was that we got to live in an apartment attached to the church building. The pay wasn't much, but the rent was basically free. And at that time, that meant everything. The arrangement came with responsibilities, of course. Pretty much every night we had to make sure the building was empty, that no one was wandering around, and then lock all of the doors. This wasn't a tiny little chapel. It was a decent-sized church with a main sanctuary, classrooms, offices, a choir room, a nursery, storage areas, and various other little rooms tucked away in corners. Our job was to walk through, check the spaces, flip off lights, and finally lock up before going to our apartment. At first, it felt kind of cool. We had this whole big building to ourselves after hours. Sometimes we'd play the piano in the sanctuary when no one was around, or we'd stand on the stage and talk into the microphone for fun. But as time passed, we started to notice that some parts of the church made us feel more uncomfortable than others, especially at night. There were plenty of evenings where, as we walked down certain hallways, the hairs on the backs of our necks would stand up. We'd pause in a doorway and feel like the room was heavier than it should be, or like eyes were on us even when it was completely empty. It wasn't constant, and it wasn't the same room every time. But there was one place that consistently felt bad. The worst room in terms of atmosphere was the bridal room just outside the main sanctuary. It was the space where brides would get ready before weddings, with mirrors and chairs and a rack for dresses. In the daytime, with sunlight coming through the windows and people bustling around, it was probably a fine room. At night, when we walked in to make sure no lights were left on and no windows were open, it was like walking into a wall of dread. When the second you crossed the threshold, your stomach would knot up. The air felt thick. You'd want to back out immediately. It wasn't just a normal, "this place is dark and I don't like it" feeling. It was more like the emotion of panic lived in the walls. My wife and I both felt it, and we didn't even have to say it out loud. We would move faster in there than in other rooms, doing what needed to be done and getting out as quickly as we could. One night, my brother-in-law agreed to do the closing up for us because we'd gotten tickets to a concert and were going to be out late. We gave him the keys, told him the routine: walk through, check rooms, use the office phone if he needed to leave us a message, lock up, go home. He was a practical guy. not someone who scared easy. Later that night, after the concert, as we listened to the voicemail he'd left. On it, he said he'd checked everything out and locked the building. His voice sounded a little off, but we figured he was just tired. It wasn't until a couple of days later, when we saw him in person, that he told us what had happened. He said that as he was finishing up his walkthrough, he went into the choir room. The choir room had a phone, so he decided to use it to call our machine and let us know he was leaving. He was standing there, talking, leaving the message. As he was finishing the call, he noticed movement in the doorway. A man peeked in, just enough to be seen, and told him, in a scolding tone, that no one was allowed to use the phones. Then the man turned and left. My brother-in-law said he thought maybe it was someone from the church administration who had come by late, or an older staff member who had a problem with people using the phones long distance. It shook him a bit that someone had been there without him hearing them come in. But he finished his locking up and went home. A couple of days later, we were walking through the building with him, on our way to see some of the administrators. We were going to mention that someone had apparently been inside after hours, and we felt like we should know who it was. As we walked down the hall, we passed a wall with framed photos of important people in the church's history. Pastors, directors, long-term members. My brother-in-law stopped mid-step, staring at one of the pictures. "That's him," he said, pointing. "That's the guy who told me not to use the phone." We looked at the photo. It was the old choir director, a man who had died about 10 years earlier. His picture had been on that wall the whole time we'd lived there. We'd walked past it hundreds of times. It was definitely the same face my brother-in-law was pointing at. He went quiet after that. He didn't argue. He didn't say he must have been mistaken. He just looked rattled. After that incident, he didn't come to visit us at the church much anymore. He didn't volunteer to lock up again. He wasn't the kind of person to make up stories like that for attention. That, more than anything, makes me think he really believed he'd seen someone who wasn't alive anymore. Looking back over those chapters of my life, the house in the Midwest, with the landing and the strange voice through dead speakers, the bathroom door that opened and closed with no one there, the church with the heavy bridal room and the dead choir director who didn't like people using the phone. I still don't have solid explanations. Maybe there are perfectly logical, scientific reasons for each event. Maybe the stereo had stored some faint static or radio interference that played at just the right moment. Maybe the house shifted and doors moved with changes in air pressure. Maybe my brother-in-law dozed off for a second and imagined the man in the choir room doorway. But when you're there, in the middle of it, when you feel watched while standing alone at the top of the stairs, or hear someone speak through speakers that have no power, or see a door move in response to your gaze, maybe doesn't always feel like enough. Even if I never see anything like that again, those moments are carved into my memory. I can still picture that quiet landing, that old stereo, that bathroom door, and that wall of photos in the church hallway. And I can still feel, even years later, that strange sense that sometimes we are not as alone as we think we are. Story 10. I'm 30 years old now, and I like to think of myself as a pretty rational, grounded person. I don't jump straight to ghosts when something weird happens. I'm the one who says, okay, what's the logical explanation? What did I miss? What's more likely? That's my first instinct with everything. I am always trying to rule out anything normal before I even think the word paranormal. That being said, after living in this house for a few years, even I have to admit there are things I can't explain away so easily. Somewhere along the way, my family and I ended up giving names to whatever is here. We joke about them, but only because they don't feel truly dangerous. One we call HG, which stands for House Ghost. The other is a little more intense. We started out calling him Mr. Creepy, and then later, Mr. White. When we first moved into this house, nothing seemed unusual. It's just a regular family house in a regular neighborhood. We didn't know many people in town yet. We hadn't really met the neighbors. My daughter was around 4 years old. We were still getting used to the layout, that sort of thing. It felt like a fresh start. The first time I noticed anything odd with HG was one morning around 9. My daughter did not have school that day, or she was on break, so we got to sleep in a little. The house was quiet, and the sun was coming through the windows. I was half asleep in bed when I heard a knocking sound. It wasn't random banging. It was that exacted rhythm people use when they do the shave and a haircut knock. 2 knocks, a pause, then 3, and a final one. That specific pattern. I lay there for a moment, not sure if I had dreamed it or if it was real. When you are just waking up, sounds from dreams and sounds from the real world can get mixed up. So I stayed in bed, listening. A moment later, I heard it again. Same pattern, clear as day. That time I knew I had really heard it. I got up and checked around. First, I looked out the window, thinking maybe it was someone at the neighbor's house, or maybe kids playing in the street. Nothing. I checked the front door, and looked out to see if there was a delivery person or someone standing there. Empty porch, empty yard. I walked around the house and saw no one. I stood there feeling a little foolish, trying to calm my nerves. Old houses make noises, I told myself. It was probably pipes or something that just happened to sound like a knock. Eventually, I went back to bed. I was almost asleep again when that same rhythm sounded one more time. Shave and a haircut. This time I grabbed my phone and called my husband at work just to tell him how freaked out I felt. I remember actually saying, "I know this sounds stupid, but I'm scared." I felt embarrassed, but I couldn't shake it. That was the first time I thought, okay, maybe this house has a little more going on than I thought. After that, little things started to happen more often. And one that sticks with me involved leftover tacos. It was a normal afternoon. I had made tacos from leftovers for my daughter. I warmed the meat, grabbed the cheese, the toppings, the shells, fixed her plate, gave it to her, and then, being the responsible adult I try to be, I put everything away. Cheese back in the fridge, meat back in its container, shells in the pantry. I'm absent-minded sometimes, but I clearly remember putting everything away. I washed my hands, sat down, and watched my daughter eat. Then I decided I wanted a taco too. I got back up and walked into the kitchen, and there on the counter was everything I had just put away. Cheese, taco shells, meat, the works. All of it sitting there like I had never touched it. For a second, I honestly wondered if I had daydreamed putting it away. But the memory of doing it was very clear. Each step, each cupboard opening and closing. This wasn't a "did I lock the door" kind of vagueness. I knew I had cleaned up. I stood there staring at the counter, and then, because humor is how I deal with nerves, I laughed out loud and said, "Oh, thanks," to the empty kitchen, like some invisible roommate had decided to be helpful and get everything out for me. I made my own taco, used up the last of the shredded cheese, and popped the plate into the microwave. I closed the microwave door, hit the button to start it, and listened to it kick on. While it was running, I walked over to the trash can with the empty cheese bag, tossed it in, and turned back to the microwave. My taco was sitting on the table. The microwave was still humming, its light on, the turntable spinning. But inside, there was no plate, no taco. It had somehow left the microwave and ended up on the table in the time it took me to walk to the trash can and back, which was maybe 2 or 3 steps. I froze. It was such a simple physical thing, but it didn't make sense. I'm forgetful about plenty of things, but there's no way I took the plate out and forgot in 2 seconds. There was no one else in the room. That one got under my skin. Food doesn't just move itself. Again, I tried to laugh it off, but my voice was a little shaky when I said, "Okay, that's just not funny," out loud to the air. Still, it felt weirdly playful, like someone making a joke that's a little too much, but not actually meant to hurt you. Another time, I actually saw HG. Or at least, I think I did. I was cooking lunch or dinner, standing at the stove, stirring something in a pan. The way our house is laid out, the kitchen has a view of the staircase through the side of my vision. I wasn't looking straight at it, but I could see it in my peripheral vision. As I was concentrating on the food, I noticed movement on the stairs. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a woman standing there on the staircase. She was wearing a long dress, not super old-fashioned like from a movie about the 1800s, but more like a casual summer dress that went down to the ankles. Her hair, her face, the dress, everything about her seemed to be in shades of gray, like a black and white photo. She wasn't transparent. She didn't glow. She just looked there. Solid. As if I turned fully, I would see a regular person. My body froze, but I kept my eyes softly focused so I could still use my peripheral vision without moving my head, when I was almost afraid that if I turned to look, she'd vanish. Of course, curiosity won, and I did finally turn my head. The staircase was empty. Nobody there. No sound of someone going up or down. Just that lingering sense that someone had been watching. Besides those clear moments, there were lots of little incidents. Things would go missing and then show up later in places we had already searched. Not just once, but over and over. One time my niece lost her phone. It was a big deal because she had set it down and then it was just gone. We had at least 6 people tearing the house apart, looking on every surface, under every cushion, in every pocket. We even checked under the bed and in between the sheets of the air mattress where she was sleeping. We found nothing. Eventually, after about half an hour, maybe a little more, because someone walked into the room where the air mattress was, and there, lying neatly on top of the bedding in plain sight, was the phone. That air mattress had been checked by 4 of us. We'd pulled the blankets completely off. It was like the house or HG had decided, "Okay, game over, here you go," and just put it back. There are even smaller, weirder things. Once, when my cousin and her fiancé were living with us for a while, he was lying in bed and suddenly yelped. He said he felt someone pinch his nipple hard. My cousin swears it wasn't her. She was lying next to him but not touching him. He had a red mark as if someone had actually grabbed skin. We laughed and teased them about it, but at the back of my mind I thought, okay, that's exactly the kind of thing a bored, invisible something might do. For the most part, though, HG feels harmless. She's like a housemate who moves your stuff occasionally and gets a little too playful, but she's not trying to scare us to death. I get the sense she stays on the main level and upstairs, where the bedrooms and bathrooms are. That's her territory. Downstairs is a different story. The basement, the laundry room, and the office area feel like they belong to someone else. That's where Mr. Creepy comes in. Or, as we later learned to call him, Mr. White. I saw him for the first time more than a year after we moved in. It was summer. I was doing a load of laundry. Our laundry room has a door that leads directly into the garage. I had that door open because it was a nice day. and the breeze from outside helped keep the laundry room from feeling stuffy. And now I just started the washing machine and then went out into the garage to clean out my car, picking up trash, shaking out mats, that sort of thing. As I walked past the open laundry room door on my way back and forth, I caught a glimpse of something standing in front of the washer. It was a tall, dark figure. Just a black shape, roughly human-sized and human-shaped, standing there, facing the washer. There was no detail I could make out. No face, no clothing texture. Just a solid dark mass in the form of a person. My first thought was very ordinary. Oh, my brother must have come downstairs and is standing there in his black winter coat. It was such a normal thought that I literally did one of those movie cliché things where I backed up a few steps to look again, expecting to see my brother and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" But when I backed up, the space in front of the washer was completely empty. No one was there. The machine was running. The door to the garage was still open. The room was just as it had been a minute earlier, minus the figure. I tried to recreate what I'd seen. I stood in different spots to see if my shadow from the garage could have been cast strangely into the laundry room. I looked at the mirror or reflective surfaces to see if maybe I'd glimpsed my own reflection in a weird angle. None of those tests matched up. It wasn't my shadow. It wasn't my reflection. It was something that had been there and was now gone. I went upstairs and asked my brother if he had been downstairs just then. He said no, he'd been upstairs cooking and hadn't left the kitchen. There was nobody else home. Yeah, that was when I decided to call that dark figure Mr. Creepy. He didn't feel as playful or warm as HG. Maybe it was just the color and the stillness, but something about that shape didn't seem friendly. I saw him one other time. I was upstairs again, walking by the staircase, and I saw a quick movement in my peripheral vision. I turned my head just in time to see what looked like a black figure moving very quickly from the base of the stairs, through the office, and into the laundry room. It crossed that distance, only 4 or 5 steps from one doorway to the next, in an instant, like someone rushing away. There was no sound of feet, no creak of boards, just that flash of movement, solid and dark. Again, I tried to explain it. I walked past the same spot to see if my own shadow could have done that. I watched the way car headlights passed the windows to see if they could have cast some strange moving shape. None of those experiments matched the speed or the form of what I had seen. It wasn't a headlight. It wasn't me. My nieces eventually started sharing the basement as a bedroom. We set up beds and their stuff down there so they could have a bit of separation and privacy. One of them started complaining about feeling watched at night, especially when she was trying to go to sleep. She'd say she didn't like turning the lights off in there. She'd say it felt like someone was in the room, just standing and staring. At first, I dismissed it as teenage drama. Teen girls can be dramatic, especially if they know a basement is supposed to be scary. I told her she was safe, that it was just her imagination, thus that no one was down there but her and her sister. I think part of me didn't want to validate the idea that our basement had something darker in it. Then, one day, I was chatting with our neighbor across the street. We started talking about the previous owner of our house, a man named Mr. White. Our neighbor and he had been good friends for many years. He told me stories about how Mr. White loved his garden, how he was particular about his lawn, that kind of neighborly gossip. Somewhere in that conversation, my neighbor mentioned that Mr. White had passed away roughly a year before. I did the math in my head and realized that lined up almost exactly with the time I had first seen that dark figure in the laundry room. It sent a shiver through me. Suddenly, mister, It creepy felt less like some random dark mass and more like the shadow of a person who had lived a full life in this house. Knowing that made me think differently about my niece's fear. I sat down with her and said, "Listen, if you ever feel like you're being watched or like someone is there, try talking to him. Call him Mr. White. Tell him you know he used to live here. Tell him he's scaring you. Ask him nicely to please leave you alone." At some point after that talk, she told me that one night when she felt very uncomfortable, she did exactly that. She spoke into the air and addressed whoever might be listening as Mr. White. She told him that she didn't mean any disrespect, but that his presence was making it hard for her to sleep, and she needed him to go. After that, the feeling of being watched went away for her. And honestly, we haven't had any big Mr. Creepy/Mr. White incidents since then. As for HG, the house ghost, her activity has also slowed way down. We might get the occasional missing object that turns up somewhere strange or a weird little sound here and there. But it's nothing like the way it was in those first couple of years. Over time, I started noticing a pattern. There seemed to be more intense activity when the emotional energy in the house was really high. For example, when my teenage nieces were living with us, hormones and drama were in full swing. There were arguments, tears, loud laughter, slammed doors, all the huge emotions that come with that age. Right around those times, we'd have more weird events. Things going missing, footsteps, that sense of someone moving through the hallways. Plus, then there were a couple of very hard periods in our family. At one point, my brother walked out on his wife and kids and moved in with his girlfriend. His wife and kids had nowhere to go, so they ended up staying with us. That meant we suddenly had a lot more people in the house, all carrying heavy feelings, abandonment, anger, grief, confusion. The air was thick with it. It's no surprise to me now that during that time, we noticed more odd things. The house felt busier on a level we couldn't see. Later, my sister-in-law found out she was pregnant again. At first, there was joy, hope, excitement. Then, after a few months, the baby passed in utero. The grief from that loss settled over everyone. There were quiet crying sessions, late-night talks, days where people just moved slowly. During that time, too, it felt like HG, Ma, and maybe even Mr. White were more active, as if they were reacting to the emotions or maybe even trying in their strange way to interact or comfort. I've read enough and listened enough to other people's stories now to know this fits what some people call poltergeist activity. The idea is that strong emotions, especially around young people, can somehow trigger or attract strange phenomena. Or perhaps that whatever is already in a place feeds off that energy, becoming more obvious and loud when feelings in the home are intense. I don't know if that's true, but it matches what I've seen. At the end of the day, I still consider myself rational. I still roll my eyes at some wild ghost stories and try to poke holes in them. But when I think about the shaven a haircut knock, the moved taco, the woman in the gray dress, the dark figure in the laundry room, my nephew's pinched nipple, my niece's missing phone, and the way things calmed down when we acknowledged Mr. White by name, I have to admit, there are things in this house I can't fully explain. We live with it. We joke about HG. We talk respectfully about Mr. White. We try not to invite fear in, but we also don't pretend nothing ever happens. It's strange, and it's sometimes unsettling, but it hasn't tried to hurt us. Most of the time, it just feels like we have a couple of extra, invisible housemates, one playful, one more serious, sharing our space and occasionally reminding us that not everything fits neatly into a logical box. Quick pause. What's unsettling you more so far? The seen stuff or the heard, felt stuff? If you had to pick one moment that proves something was there, is which story is it? And what was the exact detail? Drop the story number and a short reason.